you check the children? Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is what
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Greetings, Fright fans, and welcome to the Horror Show. I'm Jaime and Fuego, so very stoked to be back here at the Horror Show channel studios to get caught up on a Patreon review for a film that I had actually never seen before. And so this was a shout out to those who voted in the poll at the end of last year. I believe this was October, if I'm not mistaken. And so yeah, we've been playing catch up for a good chunk of this year with rounding out the Dylan's New Nightmare promotional period, as well as myself being back at Arizona State for my film and media studies degree, which I am right at the finish line of. Just have a little Spanish and math that I'm wrapping up. But yeah, guys, so this is a film from 1982. It's a British psychological horror thriller with some pretty serious dramatics in it as well, entitled The Sender. And so this is directed by Robert John Christian, I believe is the name of the director. And so a few music videos, a few things from the 80s and 90s that I was like, oh, Nostradamus. I'm like, oh, it's not the film that I thought it was. And I'm just like, oh, Masterminds. Oh, not the film that I thought it was. So I guess maybe the infamy that this film's director lives in is the fact that he directed Battlefield Earth. Yeah, shout out to the Scientologists and whatnot, and obviously John Travolta. But yeah, guys, so this actually is a lot more quality, though, than something like Battlefield Earth. I mean, leaps and bounds in every possible capacity, but this won the poll for good reason. As I was doing a little bit of research about this flick, I found out that apparently, to some degree, it inspired Wes Craven in the just things happening within dreams aspect and incorporating some of that into A Nightmare on Elm Street, which came out, I believe, 2 years later in 1984. And so, but yeah, so this is a film that, overall thoughts, it was intriguing. Nothing that really blew me away or anything of that particular nature, but I will say it had some, from a standpoint of someone like me who was raised in a religious household, and there's a lot of Christisms in this. It's probably not even like a real word, but there are a good number of those in this flick, in the fact that there is a mysterious John Doe of a character that shows up, and there is just some very odd discussion, comparisons made, parallels, things of that nature. But it does explore aspects of telepathy, which in the late 70s and early 80s, I mean, my beloved Cy King, you know, from all those years of doing Hail to Stephen King before it went on kind of a on and off hiatus since I returned back to school. But yeah, I mean, stuff like The Dead Zone and Firestarter, and even Carrie to a degree. Now that's, you know, that's aspects of pyrokinesis and telekinesis and, you know, foresight and all kinds of different things. But just these sort of like mental abilities were a big point of fascination in this particular time period of, you know, the 70s and the 80s and stuff. And so I can understand why this would be greenlit and why it very obviously did have a budget. No actors that I recall seeing in an abundance of things or anything, but they were all very capable. And you know, I do enjoy films that take place in this sort of like mental institution. I mean, speaking of Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean Nightmare 3, some of the aspects that you get in, because it's not mental institution in Exorcist 3, but, you know, just hospital in general in that regard. Gothica, underrated, in my opinion, the Halle Berry flick. So I do enjoy this sort of setting because there is a very sterile sort of creepiness to these sort of places. And I thought this movie was interesting. It's very interesting as far as like kind of a, and it's interesting, as far as like a time capsule of a lot of the fascinations of this particular time. And, you know, I already mentioned acting. There are some very cool sort of camera bits manifesting the abilities of this John Doe that randomly shows up. So I wasn't like over the moon for this film or anything, but it really felt like good horror homework in a lot of ways for somebody who has not seen as many of these lesser known but yet still relatively respected of this particular time period. I would imagine this is one that, you know, shout out to our dearly departed friend Sam Glass. I think that I actually remember him talking this flick up, you know, a year or two ago, or maybe a little bit longer than that. So yeah, those who have been in the horror know for a lot longer than me and Cecil and the rest of the team here, you know, this is one that I had heard thrown around, you know, from time to time. And so it was good to actually finally get the chance to see it. So story-wise, the film starts up with this dude who just wakes up in the middle of the woods. So he's like sleeping out in the middle of the woods, just right on the ground, you know, didn't even like try to fashion himself some sort of like pillow with like the brush or like, you know, arm on a rock to like prop yourself up. No, he's just like on the ground, passed out. And so he awakens, and the first thing that he does is he goes and he starts picking up a bunch of the rocks at this lake. And I believe this is supposed to be in the New England area, somewhere in like, you know, maybe Maine or, you know, Connecticut or whatever, somewhere up in that particular area of the country, or so I surmise, if I recall correctly. And so he starts filling all his pockets with these rocks, and then he just goes and walks directly into the lake. So he's obviously trying to drown himself, but after he is rescued and taken into this mental institution for evaluation, the woman who starts helping him and starts to get this motherly, but yet maybe it's a little bit more of an affinity for this John Doe that, you know, Johnny, as they start calling him, which is brought in, and they're trying to examine him and try to figure out, you know, what the hell his deal is, because no ID, can't remember his name, can't remember where he lives, any of that sort of stuff. But, you know, she calls him out, and she's like, yo, if you were actually trying to legitimately kill yourself, why don't you jump off a bridge? Why didn't you, you know, there's all kinds of different ways where it could have been a lot more definitive, you know, to make sure your demise actually transpired. And so he does it in this populated area with tons of people that could come and rescue him. So often in these sort of suicide attempts, you know, psychologists, they immediately say, yeah, this was a cry for help. This was not somebody who really wanted to die. And that does start to become evident as our lead doctor analyzes him more. And so she has kind of the whole butting heads thing going down with some of the other doctors there who want to get more extreme with trying to thwart him from any further suicide attempts. They're pushing for electroshock therapy, things of that nature. So much more invasive, much more potentially harmful as far as, you know, just from a physical standpoint. And, you know, this doctor who's clashing with our lead lady is like, oh no, the electroshock always helps. And, you know, they don't feel any pain at all. And she's like, have you ever experienced electroshock, doctor? You know, so, you know, the kind of differing ideals and whatnot. So she does really get connected to this Johnny and has the whole compassionate connection. But I feel like it is a little bit more than just that motherly doctor-patient sort of thing. It is there's something else going on, and perhaps that's just me reading in the subtext, who knows. But as far as story segueing into acting, you know, his powers start to manifest themselves, and so he almost has like kind of a oh god, I can't even think of the proper terminology for where you can basically transport yourself after you are, like, you're in sleep, and you can kind of transprojection, I think it's called. Don't quote me on that, unfortunately, but yeah, so that's essentially what this dude has the ability to do, and more often than not, that's when he is trying to inflict harm on other people, whether it's his fellow inmates, one of which in particular, who also goes by the moniker of Jesus, the Messiah, as some of the doctors call him, butting heads, or at least the Messiah is picking on Johnny. And so, yeah, his powers manifest in inflicting harm and attempting to kill. At one particular point, there's this chase scene where the doctor is being chased by a pickup truck that nobody is driving, and yet Johnny is in the passenger side. So there are some thrilling moments in this, and I'll get to those in the effects as I'm rounding out the review. But, you know, the performance of this actor who plays Johnny, it was his first major role. It says introducing, so on, and so that was it was the first big thing that this actor had done, and decent. I mean, very, very serviceable. Nothing that really blew me away, though. The tortured aspects were fine, but it didn't go as far into the pain at times as I was really thinking that it needed to. And then there were other times where it was just, I guess because the character is supposed to be more stoic and more spacey to a degree, that even when interacting with the other I wanted to say inmates, the other patients, you know, and they are kooky characters. Even beyond the Messiah, there's this other dude who thinks that it's 82, mind you. He still thinks that Vietnam is going on. So because you think he's perfectly fine and does not need to be locked up, he's still wearing like the military fatigues and everything. And he says to Johnny, he's like, hey, so how are our boys doing over there? And Johnny's like, what are you talking about? The war's been over for years. And he's like, they got to you too? They told you to say that. So it's kind of funny and kind of tragic. And so those are really the only two fellow inmates that are inmates. I keep saying patients that are relatively fleshed out. There's this other girl that they make it seem like there's kind of a romantic thing going on between the two of them, but it is totally half-baked, underexplored. And even when they have like a little kiss near the end of the movie, it doesn't doesn't really amount to much. And then there is the motherly presence of Johnny, and so the mother is where there is the big mystery of what her relationship was with her son. Was she like too much coddling? Was it, was she trying to protect her son? Was she trying to be harmful? Was she, that's one of the major mysteries, and that's where the doctor really comes to odds with this motherly figure of Johnny's. And so there are a lot of interesting ideas. This is not a bad movie by any means. It just did not really thrill me immensely or anything of that nature. It's not one of those like underseen like gems, like diamond in the rough status. No, I wouldn't classify it as that. But there is intriguing moments, and most notably in some of the effects where there is a manifestation of Johnny's attack when they try to do some experimental things on him about halfway through the movie, and like they're attempting to put him under, and they've got the little things all stuck to his head and everything. And he starts to rage, and he's like throwing everybody off of him, but he's doing it with like telekinetic abilities or something. And so people being thrown through glass, and then the Messiah is attacked in the shower, and the Vietnam dude thinks he's back in the war, and he's hearing things and everything. And so then after the situation calms down, everything goes in reverse. And so obviously they were just running the film backwards, but the effect works pretty well. There's another bit where, because she's within the fixation and the proximity and everything with this lead doctor woman, she begins to see things, and it's obviously Johnny's fault. And there's one scene in particular where she's in this bathroom, and there's like mirrors cracking and blood coming out of sinks, a la the Bevy from the Levee bit from It. And so there are some creative beats that are unsettling within this movie. Unfortunately, they're not really enough, as I said, to really put this like on like a high recommend status or anything. The score is very well done, though. It is a very sweepy, synthy, stringy, I should say, sort of thing. It is very much of the avant-garde approach that we were getting from at least a score standpoint with a lot of the horror and thriller things in the 70s and 80s that were going, even if they did have popcorn aspects to themselves, they were much about not being silly. They were taking themselves very seriously. And aside from some of the darkly comedic aspects, like with the dude still thinking he's in Nam, this entire movie is pretty straight-faced with not just the themes that it explores, especially with the Jesus-y aspects that I mentioned, but yeah, with the aspects of trauma and trying to work through just different aspects of abuse, different abilities that you're trying to make sense of. And so, yeah, I'm glad that I watched it, even though I wouldn't say it's not streaming anywhere, unfortunately. If it was on like a Shudder or a Screambox, or one of the other streaming services, I would give that a shout out and say give it a look for its place in the development of this sort of early 80s, dramatic thriller horror sort of pantheon and whatnot. But the fact that I had to actually, I think I spent like $6 to rent for $6, $5, somewhere around there to rent it on VOD. I don't necessarily know if that was money well spent. And once again, that's not a knock, but with so many other things from this era that I still haven't watched that are on the streaming services that I'm already paying for, I mean, I don't know, guys. So that is my thoughts on 1982's The Sender, directed by Roger John Christian. I believe I should probably double check, so I'm not putting foot in mouth. Yep, Roger John Christian. So in any event, guys, I extend a grande gracias. I have been Jaime and Fuego. You can find more on all social media sectors, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTokies. And also, obviously, here, if you were seeing this on the Patreon, just still liking it, even though some of these migrate over to the main YouTube channel for the general public, others do not. But still, like for the, algorithm and, the metrics and everything like that, still liking it and leaving a comment so we can check that out definitely helps a whole hell of a lot. So I've been Fuego. Y'all have been Rad Status, everybody. Thanks from myself, Cecil, the girls, Robert, the entire gang here. And until next time, Fright fans, remember, stay scared.